Ceri Isfryn. She's going to talk about the Oklahoma City bombing. Ceri, thanks for stopping by. And you know what? This is something that I remember. It's something like almost like a 9/11 in a ways. We will never forget when there's domestic terrorism or any type of terrorism in our country. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, certainly. And I think, one of the reasons I wanted to do this now actually is I was a little too young to remember this and at the time. And it kind of occurred to me that actually there probably enough time has passed, 30 years has passed, but there probably is a generation or two generations who don't know what happened that day. And as you say, to this day, it is still the deadliest domestic terror attack in the US history. So it felt important, certainly with the 30th anniversary coming up, that we do something to try and commemorate that.
Yeah, and it's really surprising how certain things happened that led to the Oklahoma City bombing. And that's, I think, one of the parts of talking about this day is it's domestic terrorism, but it was led to one act that happened years earlier in preparation. I didn't know that till after studying it and watching other documentaries on why Oklahoma City bombing.
Yeah, and I think, we do go a little into the how we got to that day from the perspective of the bomber in the series, but I really wasn't that interested in this particular series to delve into it too much because I think the thing that was important for me was about really hearing from those people who were there that day, their perspectives and what it was like to be there. Because I do think that the way you understand the impact of something, for me at least, is to feel it and to understand the human stories of it. And I think for me, that's where the power lies in a documentary like this is that, those generations who don't know the story, like I said, or certainly, maybe some who've forgotten it over the years. I think it's through those human stories and sometimes, extremely harrowing, but also oddly filled with hope and resilience. And I think that's one of the things that actually really surprised me when speaking to some of these survivors is that, all of them in some way or another brought up the notion of hope. And I think that's the biggest thing I learned working on this actually is that, even when something horrendous like this happens, Oklahoma City and the people who lived through it showed that you can be resilient and overcome it, I suppose.
Right. Overcoming something, I mean, to go through something so horrific and survive it and be a testimony towards this is yeah, I'm sure when you were interviewing these people, you were like, oh my gosh, if I had to go through something like that. Ah,
Yeah,
horrific.
most definitely.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think, particularly we interview parents who lost their children in that bombing. Of course 168 people died, but I think it's important to remember there was a daycare in that building and 19 of those children died. And so, when you're sat there talking to parents who've lost their children, one, she was actually working there, so was a bit older, and then, a mother who lost both of her young toddlers. Um, I think it's by speaking to them that I found it extraordinary, first of all, that they were even able to sit there talking to me. Um, and that epitomizes that resilience I'm talking about, really, that I think you can really feel it in Oklahoma City. And it's probably the biggest thing I hope people do take away from this actually is as well as the hope that it sparks a conversation about the dangers of extremism today, um, that people can see some of that hope and resilience and that humanity actually that can come from something so evil.
And you think about it, we can snap as human beings so easily based on a hard day, based on specific things. This was completely planned, but we have to look at specifically enough mental health at the end of the day, too. When these certain horrific events happen or different things, we have to be ready because there's shootings in churches, there's terrorism and terrible mass casualties all the time in this country. We really have not it's not stopped from 30 years ago. And I think that listening to these survivors that have gone through this and lost loved ones, hopefully will make people understand the repercussions of making a decision like this.
I certainly hope so. And we interviewed President Bill Clinton as part of the series, and I think he summed it up really well, where he was talking about how essential differences are. Differences are essential, differences are good, but not if they come at the cost of common humanity. And what happened on April 19th showed what happens when you forget common humanity. And I think that is such an important message that you can disagree well, as long as you don't forget that. And hopefully what this series shows is in very emotional terms, the impact of what happens when you do forget that.
The impact is so what do you hope the most our viewers will get out, your viewers are going to get out of this as a director, as a filmmaker saying, I really want people to gain something from this?
I do think it's that. I just hope that people really feel the impact of terrorism, beyond the kind of something they read about in an article, that they feel the long lasting impact of terrorism as well, I think, because I think it's quite easy, to sort of think if it's not something you've lived through that, oh, it happened 30 years ago. But actually, everybody we spoke to in their own different ways still lives with that. And, that shapes their lives in indeterminate ways. And actually, I think it shaped Oklahoma City. How could it not? But I think all of these people in the city itself, it didn't define them. So I think it's both of those things. I think it's understanding as a bit of a warning call, I guess, the real impact or the potential impact of something like this, as well as appreciating actually just how resilient people can be and how remarkable that is.
And then the last thing is specifically enough, hopefully parents start talking to their kids about this, to have that conversation. Hopefully this can be aired in schools so that people can see the human tragedy, not just that one event. And that what terrorism leads to, what mass casualties lead to, and how people live with this the rest of their lives. And if parents can talk to kids, teachers can talk to kids, and everything saying the decisions we make can be life changing for generation upon generation, to really never consider this or to report something like this if it could happen.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that really strikes me actually is that, people think of this, it's a federal building, right? That was bombed. And I guess people have certain preconceptions of who might go work in a federal building. But actually, it had a credit union, it had a daycare. These were just ordinary, everyday Americans in an ordinary town in the middle of America going to work that morning. And I think that's something that actually for people who have watched and I hope will watch, that I think really resonates. This isn't some big city or, this is, it could be anywhere in America. And I think that's also, important in the context of this story, is that these were just ordinary Americans who ended up, some of them doing extraordinary things that day. That's certainly something I hope resonates.
I think that, one other thing is Oklahoma City has never gotten over this in 30 years, in my opinion. There's still lots of pain and suffering that people have gone through. It's not like 30 years later, Oklahoma City's recovered completely from this. Agree?
I don't know. I think well, I don't know, because
I mean, the
I think I
people
had
at
an
least.
interesting
I mean, I
conversation
guess the
with,
recovery of never forgetting, kind of like 9/11 in a way in New York City,
yeah,
that it's always going to
certainly,
touch
but
people's hearts. Yeah.
yeah, but I think one thing I will say that genuinely surprised me when I went to Oklahoma City was actually just as a city, a modern day city, just how vibrant it is. And I think one of the things that if anybody goes there is a must see is the memorial in the middle of Oklahoma City, because I think what they do there is not only do they kind of, educate about what happened, a week after every anniversary, they held a marathon. And that for me embodies, I think, the spirit I've felt in Oklahoma, which is yes, they remember. Inevitably, the city is completely shaped by it because I think, everybody knew somebody or was connected somehow to somebody in the building. Um, but then I think what they've really grasped onto is the importance of commemorating whilst also showing that resilience. And I guess that the anniversary followed by the marathon is quite a literal embodiment of that spirit, I think.
And thinking 30 years, that's something that again is, as a filmmaker, is an amazing thing to have to cover and to will live on your documentary in so many ways. I think that is something that why you do this, right?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And I think the reason I do it actually is, in the last couple of weeks, being able to show those people who trusted us with their stories that the reason I do my job is when they sit there and say, you got my story right. And that's what it was like to be there that day. It's the point at which they tell me you got our stories right. Because it's a huge privilege that people trust you, particularly when it comes to something like this. And you're asking them to sit there with you for hours on end talking about this horrendous day. Um, So I just, I just hope that they feel like we've done justice to their stories, to, and to honor those that were lost as well.
All right. Oklahoma City bombing. One Day in America is a three-part series which premieres Wednesday, tomorrow, April 2nd, on the National Geographic Channel, Disney Plus, and Hulu. I have Disney Plus. I'm going to be definitely checking it out. Appreciate it. Thanks again, Ceri, and thanks for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
You're listening and watching The Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.